Okay, welcome, lovely quilters. Thank you for joining today. I set myself a goal of completing some of my unfinished projects from my sewing room. I tallied them all up last week and I have 12 unfinished projects. Actually, I think there was even a few more hiding somewhere else, but 12 were featured on my UFO video last week. This is the first one that I showed as it was the closest one to being completed. And all I needed to do was sandwich it up with the batting and the backing. And the backing on this is a lovely silvery gray minky. And then I needed to get it quilted. Now, I had the option, I could have sent this to a long armor, but one of the reasons that I upgraded my sewing machine a few months ago was that I wanted to be able to finish quilts at home myself. I am using the Free Motion quilting foot on the Bernina. For me, I believe it's foot number 29. And I am using Aurifil thread. I believe it's the 50 weight Aurifil thread in the color Dove, which is a really nice silvery gray, which goes great with the colors in this quilt. And then I am using a meander with loops. So kind of a looping meander. And I am not an expert in free motion quilting, but I've been trying to get better. And I do believe the only way to get better at something is just to keep on trying. So I have lowered the feed dogs. I have put on my Ross gardening gloves that I picked up for $3 because they give me a little bit of grip when I'm trying to free motion quilt. And when I attended the quilt festival, I went by the Bernina booth and I talked to one of the reps for a while because I told her, I was like, I'm trying to get better at my free motion quilting. And I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but I feel like sometimes my stitches are all over the place. And she asked me what kind of needle I was using. And I said I was using a universal needle. And she said, well, you need to either get a top stitch needle or a quilting needle. And so I went over to the Bernina where they were selling the accessories, that booth, and I bought both kinds. And what I have in right now is what they call the Bernina quilting needle. And I do feel like it helps me get more even stitches. Now, I do believe if I had bought the stitch regulator, which is an add-on to the Berninas, it would give me better control. Right now, I'm having to just control the speed with my foot, and I don't have a stitch regulator. But the stitch regulator add-on is like $800 or more, depending on if you find it on sale or not. And I just can't spend that kind of money right now. So I am just trying to get better at keeping my hands moving fluidly along with whatever speed I'm providing from the foot pedal. It took me a few days off and on to free motion quilt this whole quilt. Okay, so this one section somehow got off. And so you can kind of see like where it was, but then somehow here, this all got off. So I'm actually about to take my seam ripper, trusty little seam ripper, and I'm gonna undo this part because pretty much the rest of the quilt, I'm pretty happy with my quilting on everything else. I feel pretty good about it. This section here is a hot mess and very distorted, and I have this giant wrinkle here. So I think it slipped here, like this is not lining up anymore. So I'm gonna unpick all this with my seam ripper. I'm going to pull this back down to where it should be, and I'm gonna requilt just this corner. Like I said, the rest of it, I'm fairly happy with pretty much how I free motioned this. The rest of it I'm fairly happy with. There's a few wrinkles, but once I wash it, I think it'll be fine. It's this section here. I just have to. I don't know what else to do. I think I made the right choice in ripping that section out and redoing it. It added like 2 more days of work for me, which was frustrating, but I just was not happy with how that section was turning out. And so I ripped it out, and then I was happy after that. And I think even the looping pattern looks pretty good from the back, the silver thread on the silver minky. So now I'm going to move on to making binding strips. I am using a white and silver fabric that is the same as the background on the front of the quilt. And I cut everything into 2.5-inch strips, and then I sewed all the strips end to end. Some of them I'd sewed before and they were straight stitched, and some of them I sewed on the diagonal, but basically just sewed all of my strips together. I am pressing the seams open where they're joined together, and then I'm ironing them in half, wrong sides together, so that the pretty side of the fabric is on the outside just folding that in half and ironing it. This is to prep my binding strips for going on the edge of the quilt. This part takes a little while, but it's always, in a way, a good feeling because I know I'm getting so close to having a finished quilt. Because once the binding's on, the end is in sight. Okay, so now I have a whole pile of binding strips prepped and ready to go. I've got my quilt trimmed up. I finished the free motion, and then I went around with the ruler and the rotary cutter and just trimmed up the edges of my quilt, and I am now ready to sew the binding on. So my preferred method for sewing binding on is to put raw edges to raw edges on the back of the quilt, leaving a tail, and then to sew it, machine stitch it down from the back of the quilt, flip it to the front, and machine stitch it down on the front of the quilt. I try to use a thread color that matches so that it won't be super obvious if I make any mistakes. When I get to the corner, I just pivot off the end, and then you fold it up and then fold it back down so that you have a nice little right angle there with a little flap. Turn and sew down the other side. It's taken me a while to get any kind of confidence with binding. It just always feels tricky. I think one of the things that always feels a little tricky to me with binding is managing the weight of the quilt. And because this quilt does have minky and batting, it is a fairly heavy quilt. Now, it is going to a cold climate, so I think the weight of it is appropriate. And it is only a throw size, so it's not a giant quilt. I think a giant quilt with minky and batting would just be so hard. But I do have a very heavy-duty machine, and the Bernina handles it well. I always change my machine to have the needle down so that if I need to stop and rearrange, it holds the place until I get kind of the weight of the quilt managed. Stopping with the needle down helps it not to skip a stitch when I come back to it. I got a lot of questions about if I'm using a minky on the back of a quilt, do I still use batting? And yes, I'm going to zoom in here. Let's get this focused, hopefully here. Okay, so I have minky, but the minky's actually, it's furry, but it's kind of thin. Then there's like a layer of cotton batting, and then I actually have my quilt top. So it's quilt top, a layer of cotton batting, and then the minky. And so it's still pretty thin. I mean, this is not very thick, but adding the batting definitely gives it a nice depth. And this quilt is going to someone who lives in a very cold climate, so I think adding that is definitely going to help. And like I said, I just did some free motion quilting, so like on the front of the quilt, you can kind of see the free motion quilting, and it's batting the top of the quilt, and now I'm adding the binding. I'm machine stitching the binding to the back, and then I will flip it to the front and machine stitch it to the front. I feel like the thread color was perfect. It's the Aurifil Dove. Okay, last step, I'm just folding the binding around to the front now because I've already attached it all to the back. So now I'm on the front of the quilt and I'm top stitching the binding down. And the thread color matches really well because I'm using a white and silver fabric and it's a silvery gray, so it just blends right in. I feel like it finishes this out really nicely. I am by no means a professional. I am just a hobbyist, and I enjoy this kind of thing, and I'm pretty excited. So this was the first of my 12 UFOs I'm trying to get finished. UFOs being unfinished objects in my quilt room. I pieced the top of this Brightly quilt several months ago, and I'm just now getting it all the way finished. So I'm happy to have this one moved from my UFO pile to my completed and ready to gift pile. And so I'm so excited to pass this on to the person who asked me to make it. And I just hope that they love it as much as I do. I think it's beautiful. I think it's soft. I think it's gonna be very warm and comforting. I got my label on there. I'm gonna back stitch here at the end, trim off any loose threads, and it's gonna be time to take some pictures. Thank you for joining me today. I appreciate you stopping by to see what I've been working on, and I hope you have a blessed day and happy quilting. If you enjoy this type of quilty content, go ahead and hit the like button, subscribe, follow along, and I hope to see you again soon.